Imagine a time when being homeless was actually a crime, where your neighbor could be put to death for witchcraft. Now, this wasn't some fantasy world. This was the reality in early modern England. It was a period where fear didn't just walk the streets, it literally wrote the laws. And that question, that's really at the heart of everything we're talking about today. See, from around 1500 to 1700, England was just an age of anxiety. You had massive religious change, political chaos, economic turmoil. It was a perfect storm. And the legal system became the lightning rod for all that fear. But here's the thing. This era didn't just see more of the same old crimes. It actually invented new ones. The people in power didn't just fear criminals. In a way, they created them by labeling entire groups of people as threats to the way things were. I mean, sure, the classic crimes like theft and murder, they didn't go anywhere. But look at the new list. Heresy, treason, vagabondage, witchcraft. These weren't just random acts of violence. No, they were seen as direct attacks on the two pillars of society, the state and the church. So, to really get a handle on this deep-seated fear of the outsider, let's zoom in on two of these new crimes, vagabondage and witchcraft. They tell us so much about what this society was truly terrified of. First up, vagabondage. When the old feudal system fell apart, England's roads suddenly filled up with people who had no land and no jobs. Now, to the wealthy, this wasn't a social crisis. It felt like an invasion. And so, just like that, poverty itself became a crime. Being homeless was no longer just bad luck. It was a threat to the entire social order. And then you have witchcraft. The Protestant Reformation, with its intense focus on the devil and his work on earth, basically poured gasoline on the smoldering embers of old folk superstitions. All of a sudden, village healers, or just lonely, independent women, they weren't just a bit odd anymore. They were potential agents of Satan, and that sparked a deadly, state-approved hunt. So you've got all these new criminals, both real and maybe imagined. But who is actually catching them? I mean, this was way before anything like a modern police force. And the answer is actually kind of surprising. You see, law enforcement wasn't a profession back then. It was everyone's duty. It was this patchwork system of part-time constables, watchmen who patrolled at night, and powerful local landowners who acted as judges. But the key part? Every single citizen was expected to help out by raising the hue and cry, basically screaming for help if they saw a crime. The whole system was built on your neighbors watching you. Okay. So we know how crimes were enforced, but what happened after someone got caught? Well, this is where things take a really terrifying turn. As the fear of society falling apart grew, the goal of punishment changed. It wasn't about reforming the criminal anymore. It was about scaring everyone else into obedience. This was the dawn of punishment as a public spectacle. And you can just watch this grim escalation happen over time. The era started with punishments we've all heard of, like being put in the stocks or whipped. But by the 1600s, they started shipping people off to the American colonies as punishment. And it all led to the infamous Bloody Code, where the number of crimes you could be executed for just exploded. Seriously, by the end of this period, you could be hanged for stealing a handkerchief. To really see how all these threads, the state's fear, the religious paranoia, the brutal punishments all wove together, let's look at two incredibly famous cases from the period. They really bring it all to life. First, the Gunpowder Plot. We've all heard of Guy Fawkes, right? But this was so much more than just trying to kill a king. This was a plan to literally decapitate the entire Protestant government in one massive explosion. The king, his ministers, parliament, the whole shebang. And here's the key. In the eyes of the government, this wasn't just treason, it was heresy. An attack on the king was an attack on God's chosen ruler on earth. So the punishment had to match that level of horror. Being hanged, drawn, and quartered, it was a grotesque piece of political theater, a gruesome public warning to anyone else who even thought about challenging the state. All right, our second case shows how this climate of fear could be twisted and exploited by a single ruthless individual. Right in the middle of the English Civil War, when everything was chaos, one man saw his chance. His name was Matthew Hopkins. Now get this, Hopkins wasn't an official. He wasn't appointed by anyone. He was a predator who just crowned himself the Witchfinder General. He preyed on the fear and total chaos of the Civil War, a time when the normal legal system had basically collapsed. He turned paranoia into a business, charging towns money to cleanse them of witches. who were almost always vulnerable, powerless women. And the numbers, well, they speak for themselves. In the 25 years before Hopkins showed up, this region saw about 40 witch trials. During his 2-year reign of terror, that number shot up to around 300. He was a serial accuser who left a trail of death behind him, all of it fueled by public panic and his own greed. So, what's the big takeaway here? It really boils down to this. A society's laws are like a mirror, reflecting its deepest, darkest fears. In early modern England, anxieties about religion, rebellion, and social change weren't just things people talked about. They were written into the law books, with ink and with blood. And that leaves us with a pretty sobering thought for ourselves, doesn't it? If the fears of the 17th century created vagrancy laws and the Bloody Code, what laws are our own modern anxieties writing right now? When we look at our fears about technology or security or national identity, are we seeing the seeds of the laws of tomorrow?